The engines died, and suddenly, the Atlantic became a prison for 145 passengers trapped on the MV Hondius. Anchored off the coast of Cape Verde, every cabin on this silent ship now feels like a ticking time bomb. With no power, no propulsion, and dwindling supplies, the crew is keeping a dark secret about why we are really stranded here. The silence of the engine room isn't just mechanical failure, it is a countdown. The end of this journey, you'll understand the immense, crushing weight of managing an invisible killer when the world decides to turn its back on you. And the final detail, the one that forced us to rewrite our entire containment strategy, is something you likely haven't heard on the nightly news. Grab a glass of water, get comfortable, and let's talk about what happens when the math of epidemiology meets the hard reality of human borders. In early May 2026, my team and I weren't just fighting a virus. We were fighting the fear that it inspired in every port authority between South America and Europe. We were dealing with the Andes strain of Hantavirus. Usually, this pathogen hides in the droppings of wild rodents, waiting for an unlucky hiker to stir up a bit of dust. But the Andes strain is different. It is the only member of its family capable of human to human transmission. When it hitched a ride onto a cruise ship, it transformed a luxury vacation into a high stakes containment operation that would ultimately end in tragedy. We had already lost 3 people, a Dutch couple and a German passenger, and the ship's manifest had become a list of potential casualties. When I looked at the data arriving from the ship, I didn't see names. I saw a trail of infection that didn't make any sense. There were 0 rodents on that ship. I checked every report, every inspection log, and every sanitary survey. Not a single mouse, not a single rat, and certainly not the long-tailed pygmy rice rat usually responsible for spreading the Andes virus. Yet, the fever spread. That realization hit me in the middle of a meeting in the Netherlands, thousands of miles away from the vessel. If it wasn't coming from the environment, it was coming from us. Direct contact, aerosolized transmission. We were looking at a pathogen that could turn a ventilation system into a highway for a disease that kills up to 30% of the people it touches. The first point I had to address was the isolation of the passengers. When you're on a cruise, the ship is your world. You expect to be pampered, to eat at the buffet, and to watch the sunset from the deck. But when the MV Hondius turned into a floating quarantine ward, those expectations vanished. I remember reading the transcript of a WhatsApp message sent by a passenger to a reporter on the shore. They said, "You don't embark on a trip with the idea that one of your fellow passengers won't make it." It's easy to look at the statistics, the total case counts, the incubation periods, the death rates, and forget the person reading them on a tiny screen in a cabin that smells of antiseptic. My job was to keep them busy. If you leave people to ruminate, the anxiety takes over, and that anxiety creates a mental health crisis just as dangerous as the virus. We pushed the crew to maintain routines, to deliver meals with a smile behind a mask, and to provide the small, necessary comforts that keep a person feeling human. It was a massive logistical challenge, but we were essentially running a floating, isolated island where the only supply line was a boat coming from the mainland of Cape Verde, and even that was a battle of its own. Now, here's where things get complicated. You might think that in a global health crisis, the world pulls together. You expect the World Health Organization to coordinate, the ports to open, and the medical teams to deploy. But reality is messy. The moment we declared a hantavirus outbreak, we triggered a diplomatic nightmare. The MV Hondius was a Dutch flagged vessel, but it was currently sitting in international waters off the coast of West Africa, and nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted that ship in their harbor. The president of the Canary Islands was incredibly clear. The ship was not docking under his jurisdiction. Cape Verde, where the vessel was anchored, was equally terrified. They saw a floating biohazard, and they did what nations do in a panic. They closed the door. This is the hot potato effect of modern border politics. The fear isn't just the disease. The fear is being the place where the outbreak lands, the place where the blame begins. I spent 18 hours a day on satellite calls, shifting between the ministries of health in Europe and the port authorities in Praia. I had to bridge that gap. I had to convince officials that we weren't just dumping a problem on their doorstep, but that we had a protocol. We had to create a chain of custody for the sick that was more secure than a nuclear weapons transport. Each patient transfer from the ship to an air ambulance had to be perfect. One slip of a glove, one tear in a suit, or one lapse in the pressure regulation of the transport chamber could turn a controlled evacuation into a community spread event. Think about that for a second. We were balancing the lives of 145 individuals against the legitimate fears of millions of people on the mainland. And the pressure, the physical, grinding pressure of that decision, is something that never truly leaves you. It's not just the science, it's the optics. Every headline that screamed about the death ship made it harder for me to find a landing spot for those who were actually suffering. But let's talk about the part that really changed everything. You see, the hardest part wasn't just the evacuation, it was the contact tracing that had already happened before we even got involved. Because the ship had made a stop at the remote British territory of St. Helena, the reach of our problem had already expanded beyond the ship's hull. When the wife of our first patient passed away during her own transit home, she had already moved through multiple transport hubs. That single event meant the virus wasn't just on a boat anymore. It had effectively leaked into the travel infrastructure of 3 different countries. This was the ghost in the machine. It forced us to realize that our containment plan was essentially playing catch up. We had to shift our mindset from quarantining a vessel to managing a global cluster. We reached out to every individual who had been in those transit hubs, even if they had no idea they'd been exposed to a potential Andes virus contact. It was tedious, and it was terrifying. Every phone call I made felt like a lottery ticket. Would they be symptomatic? Had they hugged their family? Had they taken the bus to work? That was the true payoff of this mission. We weren't just saving the passengers on the Hondius. We were identifying a hidden, slow-moving chain of transmission that could have exploded into a much larger tragedy if we hadn't been absolutely relentless. When we finally managed to evacuate the last of the critically ill patients on May 6th, the relief wasn't a sudden surge of joy. It was a slow, heavy exhale. We moved them to specialized isolation wards in the Netherlands and Germany, where the doctors there took over the fight. Seeing those ambulances line up on the tarmac at the airport, knowing that we had successfully moved patients from a drifting, isolated vessel into a controlled medical environment without a single secondary transmission, that was the moment the weight finally shifted. You think you're in control when you're writing the protocols, but you're really just managing the variables. The truth is, we got lucky. We had the right team, we had the cooperation of the right ministers, and we had the technology to isolate the patients during flight. If any one of those pieces had failed, the story would look very different. Looking back, the MV Hondius crisis was a masterclass in how fragile our global health security actually is. We're all connected, and a single travel decision in Argentina can ripple out to reach the coast of Africa and the hospitals of Europe in a matter of weeks. The ships might stay in the harbor, but the biology doesn't respect the lines we draw on our maps. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you feel isolated or where you feel like the world is locking its doors against you, remember this. There is always a team on the other side of that radio working to make sure you get home. It isn't easy, it isn't always fair, and it's never as fast as you want it to be. But the effort? The effort is the only thing standing between us and the chaos. So the next time you see a headline about a ship in quarantine, look past the fear. Look at the people. And look for the experts in the background, carefully, quietly, holding the line. Thanks for being here today. If this helped you see the complexity behind the news, hit subscribe and share this with someone who appreciates the real story behind the headlines. I've got plenty more of these to share. See you next time.